What do you say when your own brother steals your inheritance in front of the entire family and everyone applauds? How do you stay calm when the grandparents who raised you hand the family home to the golden child and tell you that you were never meant to inherit anything? I learned to breathe, to smile. And then I asked Grandpa the one question that made his fork slip from his hand, because he knew exactly what was coming next. Before we continue, we ask you to hit the hype button, subscribe, and like the video to help the channel grow. Tell us which city you are from in the comments. We would like to get to know our audience better. The moment I walked through the door of my grandparents' house that Thanksgiving morning, I knew something was different. The air felt charged, like everyone was holding their breath for some grand announcement. I carried the pumpkin pies I'd bought, 3 of them, because Grandma always complained there was never enough, and set them on the kitchen counter. Nobody looked up. My Aunt Linda gave me a tight smile from across the room, the kind that said she knew something I didn't. Trevor, my younger brother, sat sprawled on the leather recliner in the living room, his phone glowing in his hand. He didn't even acknowledge my arrival. "Ethan, you're early," Grandma said, wiping her hands on her apron. Her voice was warm, but distracted. "Thought I'd help set up," I said, shrugging off my jacket. "Oh, that's sweet, but we have everything under control." She turned back to the stove, dismissing me with the ease of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. I moved through the house like a ghost. Set the table, arranged chairs, filled water glasses, folded napkins into neat triangles the way Grandma liked them, straightened the centerpiece, a dried flower arrangement that had seen better days. Trevor didn't move from his spot. When I walked past him to grab more napkins from the hallway closet, he smirked at his phone screen. "Still playing servant, huh?" he muttered. I didn't respond. 20 years of this had taught me that silence was easier than confrontation, easier than trying to explain to people who didn't want to listen, easier than defending myself to a family that had already made up their minds about who I was. The family started arriving around noon. Uncle Ray with his booming laugh and a bottle of wine he'd probably gotten on sale. Aunt Linda's husband, Frank, carrying a casserole dish that looked store-bought. Cousins I barely knew anymore, their kids running wild through the hallways, screaming and laughing. Everyone greeted Trevor first. Everyone asked him about his new car, his latest business idea, his plans for the future. I stood in the corner of the dining room, holding a serving spoon, invisible. "Trevor, that car is gorgeous," Cousin Julie gushed, her voice high and excited. "How did you afford it?" Trevor shrugged, his grin wide and practiced. "Just making smart moves, you know? Investing in the right opportunities." I wanted to laugh. The smart moves were loans from Grandpa that would never be repaid. The opportunities were half-baked schemes that crashed and burned within months. But nobody wanted to hear that. Nobody wanted to know the truth. Dinner began with the usual chaos. Plates passed hand to hand. Voices overlapping in a cacophony of family noise. The smell of turkey and stuffing filling the room, mixing with the scent of wine and perfume. Grandpa carved the turkey with the precision of a man who'd done it every year for 50 years. His hands were steadier with the carving knife than they were with anything else these days. I sat near the end of the table, wedged between a cousin's husband whose name I couldn't remember and an empty chair that nobody claimed. Quote 9. Grandma said, her eyes shining with pride. Trevor leaned back in his chair, grinning like he'd already won the lottery. "Well, it's still in the early stages, but let's just say I've got some big moves coming. Really big. Could be life-changing." Everyone nodded. Someone clapped. I cut into my turkey and chewed slowly, tasting nothing. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Grandma cooed. "You've always had such a head for business." I almost laughed. Trevor's, just, quote, 13 zines had cost my grandparents thousands of dollars over the years. Loans he never repaid, credit cards he maxed out in their names, bills that mysteriously appeared on their statements. But nobody wanted to remember that. They only saw the charm, the smile, the promises. Quote 14. Uncle Ray said, glancing my way like he'd just remembered I existed. Still doing that computer thing? Systems architecture, I said. Yeah. He nodded like I'd said I worked at a grocery store. Quote 19. Trevor snorted into his wine glass. I ignored him. Then Grandpa cleared his throat. The table went quiet. He set down his knife and fork with deliberate care, his weathered hands trembling slightly. Everyone's eyes turned to him. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker. Before we go any further, he said, his voice carrying that authoritative tone he used for important family matters, your grandmother and I have something we need to share. My stomach tightened. I set down my fork. We've been thinking a lot about the future, Grandpa continued. About this house. About what happens when we're gone. We're not getting any younger, and we want to make sure everything is settled properly. Grandma reached over and squeezed his hand. Her eyes were already misty. We've decided, Grandpa said, his gaze sweeping the table, that this house will go to Trevor. The words hung in the air for half a second before Trevor shot to his feet, arms raised like he'd just won a championship. Quote 26. The table erupted. Applause, cheers. Aunt Linda's husband whistled. Someone shouted, "Congratulations, Trevor!" I sat frozen, my hands folded in my lap. Trevor's grin was enormous. He walked around the table, shaking hands, accepting hugs. Quote 28. He said, his voice thick with false humility. Quote 29. I felt Aunt Linda's eyes on me. She wasn't clapping. Quote 30. Grandpa added, almost as an afterthought. Quote 31. The message was clear. You get nothing. Trevor leaned against the table, still grinning. Quote 32. Laughter rippled through the room. I wasn't sure if they thought he was joking. I took a slow breath, reached for my water glass, took a sip, set it down gently. The ice clinked against the sides. Then I looked across the table at Grandpa. His fork was halfway to his mouth, his face flushed with pride and relief. I smiled. Calm. Steady. Grandpa, I said softly, should I explain it? Or will you? His fork slipped from his hand. It clattered against his plate, the sound impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Trevor spun toward me, his grin faltering. Explain what? I didn't answer. I just kept my eyes on Grandpa, watching the color drain from his face, watching his hands shake as they gripped the edge of the table, watching the realization dawn in his eyes. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Same area code as the county records office. I slipped it back into my pocket and smiled again. Quote 36. I said. Quote 37. But Grandpa's face told a different story. He knew, and now, so would everyone else. I left early. Nobody stopped me. The drive back to my apartment felt longer than usual, the silence in my car heavy and thick. I replayed the moment over and over in my mind. Grandpa's frozen expression, Trevor's confused sneer, the way Aunt Linda had looked at me like she'd just realized something terrible. The way the entire table had gone silent, every fork suspended in midair. By the time I unlocked my apartment door, my hands were steady again. I set my keys on the counter, poured myself a glass of water, and sat down at my kitchen table. The folder was already there, exactly where I'd left it that morning. Thick, labeled, organized. I opened it and stared at the documents inside. This wasn't new. None of this was new. I'd been preparing for this moment for years, long before I even knew it was coming. Because deep down, I'd always known. I'd always known that my grandparents saw Trevor as the golden child, the one who deserved everything, while I was just there, the dependable one, the one who showed up, fixed things, paid for things, and never asked for credit. I flipped through the pages. Bank statements, receipts, emails, every single dollar I'd spent on that house over the last 2 decades, documented and filed. Roof repairs, new plumbing, property taxes, the furnace replacement 3 winters ago when Grandpa couldn't afford it, the kitchen remodel when Grandma's arthritis made it impossible for her to reach the old cabinets. I'd paid for all of it, not because I wanted recognition, not because I expected anything in return, but because they needed help, and I was the only one who could give it. Trevor, meanwhile, had spent those years asking for money and never paying it back. I had the records for that, too. 3 separate loans from Grandpa, totaling nearly $30,000. Gone. Vanished into Trevor's lifestyle of expensive dinners, failed business ventures, and cars he couldn't afford. But somehow, Trevor was still the favorite. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. The memories came flooding back, sharp and bitter. 10 years ago, when I'd first started working in systems architecture, Grandpa had asked me what I did for a living. I'd tried to explain: network infrastructure, data security, contract compliance. He'd nodded politely and then changed the subject to Trevor's new sales job. Trevor had been selling used cars at the time, barely making commission, but Grandpa talked about it like Trevor was running a Fortune 500 company. 8 years ago, when the roof started leaking, I'd been the one who paid for the repairs. $15,000. Grandpa had thanked me, said he'd pay me back when he could. He never did. 6 months later, Trevor asked for $10,000 to invest in a business opportunity. Grandpa gave it to him without hesitation. 5 years ago, when Trevor had shown up at Thanksgiving with a black eye and a story about a business deal gone wrong, everyone had rallied around him. Poor Trevor. Unlucky Trevor. I'd been the one who quietly paid off the loan shark who'd given him that black eye, but nobody ever knew. Trevor certainly never thanked me. He'd just disappeared for 3 months and came back with a new girlfriend and more debt. 2 years ago, when Grandma had her hip surgery, I'd taken a week off work to stay with them, cooked meals, drove her to appointments, helped her with physical therapy exercises, sat with her when she couldn't sleep. Trevor had sent a text, quote, 40, and now, here we were. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old messages, found the one I was looking for, a text from Grandpa sent 6 years ago, late at night after I'd paid the property taxes that year. Ethan, thank you for everything you've done for this house. Your grandmother and I don't say it enough, but we know who's really keeping this place standing. When the time comes, we'll make sure you're taken care of. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I took a screenshot and added it to the folder. The next morning, I went to work like nothing had happened, sat at my desk, reviewed contracts, answered emails. My coworkers asked how Thanksgiving had been. I told them it was fine. Great turkey, good to see family, all the usual responses. At lunch, I walked to the coffee shop near the courthouse. It was a small place, the kind where regulars knew each other by name. The barista knew my order before I reached the counter. I ordered a black coffee and sat by the window, watching people pass by. The street was busy with holiday shoppers, their arms full of bags, their faces stressed and tired. A familiar voice broke through my thoughts. Ethan Hale? I looked up. It was Nora Finch, a clerk from the county records office. We'd crossed paths a few times over the years through work. She was sharp, efficient, and didn't waste time on small talk. Nora, I said, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. Sit. She did, setting her own coffee down. I tried calling you yesterday, left a message. I saw. What's up? You filed a records request last month, property title history for the Hale residence on Maple Grove. Right. I finally got the full file pulled. There's something unusual. I leaned forward. Unusual how? The title transfer paperwork from 1998 includes a conditional clause. It's buried in the addendum, but it's there. The property was placed under a specific agreement. Whoever funded renovations and property taxes for more than 10 consecutive years would be named the sole inheritor upon the owner's passing. I felt my pulse quicken. And that clause is still enforceable? As far as I can tell, yes. It was never rescinded or updated. If you can prove you've met the conditions, the property legally defaults to you, not your brother. I sat back, processing. Does anyone else know about this? Not unless they've requested the same file. And honestly, most people wouldn't even notice that clause. It's written in old legal language, tucked between standard terms. You'd have to be looking for it. I was looking for it. Nora smiled faintly. I figured. I thanked her, finished my coffee, and walked back to work. My mind was racing, but my face stayed calm. I'd learned a long time ago how to keep my emotions locked down, how to present a neutral front, no matter what chaos was happening inside. That evening, I sat in my apartment and made a list. Every conversation I'd had with Grandpa over the years, every time he'd promised that the house would, quote, 58. Every time he'd thanked me for my help. Every time he'd acknowledged what I was doing for them. And then I made another list. Every time Trevor had taken money. Every time he'd promised to pay it back and didn't. Every time he'd lied, manipulated, and walked away clean. Every time the family had celebrated his failures as learning experiences while dismissing my successes as expected. My phone buzzed. A notification from the family group chat. Trevor. Can't believe I'm finally getting the house. Time to start making some real money off this place. Thinking about selling it next month. Aunt Linda. Selling it? Already? Trevor. Yeah, why not? It's mine now. I stared at the screen. My jaw tightened. Selling it next month. The house that had been in our family for 50 years. The house where our mother had grown up. The house where we'd spent every holiday, every birthday, every important moment of our childhood. Trevor wanted to sell it for cash. I closed the group chat and opened my folder again. This time, I didn't just look at the documents. I started organizing them. Chronologically, by type, by relevance, creating a narrative that would be impossible to dispute. Trevor thought he'd already won. He had no idea what was coming. The county records office smelled like old paper and stale air. I pushed through the heavy glass doors and approached the front desk, where a young clerk looked up from her computer. Quote 62. I said, keeping my tone polite but firm. Quote 63. She typed something into her system. Quote 64. Quote 65. Her fingers paused. She glanced at me, then back at the screen. Quote 66. I slid my driver's license across the counter. Grandson. She studied it, comparing the address to something on her screen, then nodded. Give me a few minutes. I sat down in one of the plastic chairs lining the wall and waited. The office was quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional rustle of paper. A clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second stretching out. I checked my phone. Another message from the family group chat. Trevor. Already talked to a real estate agent. Market's hot right now. Could get at least $750K for the place. Uncle Ray. Wow, that's incredible, Trevor. Smart move. Cousin Julie. You're going to be rich. I locked my phone and slipped it back into my pocket. The clerk returned with a thick file folder. You can review it here. Can't take photos, but you can request copies. How much for copies? 10 cents a page. I'll take everything. She raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. I spent the next 2 hours going through the file, page by page. Most of it was standard, original deed, transfer records, tax assessments, property surveys, zoning information. But buried in the middle, just like Nora had said, was the addendum from 1998. I read it 3 times to make sure I understood every word, every implication. The property would remain under the joint ownership of Walter and Margaret Hale until their passing. At that time, It would transfer to whichever descendant had contributed the most financial support for renovations and property taxes over a minimum period of 10 consecutive years. The clause was binding and could only be nullified through a formal legal amendment signed by both Walter and Margaret in the presence of a notary. No such amendment existed. I requested copies of everything and walked out with a manila envelope thick enough to use as a weapon. The next stop was the public park near my apartment. I needed to think, needed to process what I'd just confirmed, needed to feel the cold air on my face and clear my head. I walked the trail slowly, the envelope tucked under my arm. The trees were bare, their branches skeletal against the gray November sky. A jogger passed me, earbuds in, oblivious. A couple sat on a bench, holding hands and talking quietly. An old man threw bread to the ducks. I stopped near the pond and stared at the water. The surface was still, reflecting the gray clouds above. A duck paddled by, leaving ripples in its wake. The ripples spread out, intersecting with each other, creating patterns. For years, I'd told myself it didn't matter, that I was helping because it was the right thing to do, that I didn't need recognition or reward. But standing there, holding proof that I'd been legally entitled to that house all along, I realized something. It wasn't about the house. It was about the erasure, the way my family had looked through me for decades, the way they'd celebrated Trevor's selfishness and ignored my sacrifices, the way Grandpa had stood in that dining room and announced my brother's inheritance like I didn't even exist, like 20 years of my life meant nothing. I pulled out my phone and opened the group chat again, scrolled through the messages. Trevor had posted a photo of himself standing in front of the house, arms spread wide, grinning like he'd conquered the world. Trevor. Mine now, finally. I pocketed my phone and kept walking. Later that evening, I drove to Trevor's apartment. It was a cramped one-bedroom in a building that smelled like mildew and cheap takeout. The hallway carpet was stained with things I didn't want to identify, and half the lights were burned out. I knocked on his door. He opened the door shirtless, a beer in one hand. Music blared from inside. "Ethan? What the hell are you doing here?" "We need to talk," he snorted. "About what? The house? Dude, it's done. Move on." "Can I come in?" He stepped aside reluctantly. The apartment was a disaster. Clothes piled on the couch, empty bottles on the coffee table, pizza boxes stacked near the kitchen, dishes overflowing in the sink. The TV was on, some reality show blaring in the background. "Still living like a college kid," I muttered. "Still acting like a jealous older brother," he shot back. I turned to face him. "Do you even know how much that house costs to maintain?" "What?" "Property taxes, insurance, repairs. Do you have any idea?" Trevor shrugged. "I'll figure it out. Besides, I'm selling it, so it doesn't matter." "You can't sell it." He laughed. "Watch me." "You can't sell it because you don't legally own it." The smile faded. "What are you talking about?" "Grandpa never completed the transfer paperwork. He announced it at dinner, but he didn't file anything with the county. The house is still in his name." Trevor's jaw tightened. Quote 92. Quote 93. Quote 94. I stepped closer. Quote 95. Trevor's face darkened. "That's not true. Read the file yourself. It's public record." "You're lying." "Am I?" He stared at me, his hand clenching the beer bottle so hard I thought it might shatter. "You're such a smug piece of work, you know that? You think you're so smart, so much better than me." "I don't think I'm better than you. Trevor, I just know the law." "Get out." "Gladly." I turned and walked toward the door. Before I left, I glanced back. "One more thing. When Grandpa asks you how you plan to pay the property taxes, you might want to have an answer ready. They're about $12,000 a year." I closed the door behind me. The drive back to my apartment felt lighter. Not because I'd won anything yet, but because I'd finally stopped pretending, finally stopped playing the role they'd assigned me. I parked in my usual spot and climbed the stairs to my floor. Inside, I opened the folder again and laid everything out on my kitchen table. Bank statements, tax receipts, emails, the title addendum, photographs of the work I'd done, contractor invoices with my signature on the payment line. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts, found the name I was looking for, hit call. Nora, it's Ethan. I need to file a declaration. How soon can we do that? The bank lobby was cold and sterile, all white walls and polished floors. Soft music played from hidden speakers. I approached the counter and asked for my account history, specifically every transaction related to payments made on behalf of Walter and Margaret Hale. The teller, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck, printed the records without question. She handed me a thick stack of papers, the printer still warm. That's quite a lot of transactions, she said. 20 years worth. Family home? Something like that. I sat down in one of the waiting area chairs and reviewed the pages. 20 years of payments. Roof repairs in 2018, $15,000. Plumbing fixes in 2016, $8,000. The furnace in 2021, $12,000. The kitchen remodel in 2019, $35,000. Property taxes year after year after year, like clockwork. $12,000 annually for 2 decades. I added them up, over $214,000. Trevor had contributed exactly nothing. I folded the papers and slipped them into my folder. The weight of it felt heavier now, but in a satisfying way. This wasn't just documentation anymore. It was proof, undeniable concrete proof, that I had carried this family on my back while Trevor coasted on charm and empty promises. I thought back to the conversation I'd had with Grandpa 3 years ago, right after I'd paid for the new heating system. We'd been sitting in his study, the room dim except for the lamp on his desk. He'd looked tired, older than I'd ever seen him. The house had felt cold despite the new furnace running. Ethan, he'd said, his voice rough. Quote 111, quote 112, quote 113. I'd waited for him to say more, to acknowledge what that meant. But he'd just patted my shoulder and changed the subject to Trevor's latest opportunity. Even then, I'd known. I'd known that gratitude wasn't the same as respect, that appreciation wasn't the same as recognition. My phone buzzed. Another group chat message. Trevor. Meeting with the agent tomorrow, getting this place appraised. Gonna be a nice payday. Cousin Julie. That's so exciting, Trevor. You deserve it. I locked the phone and stood up. Next stop. The hardware store parking lot. I didn't plan to go inside. I just needed a place to sit and think. But as I pulled into a spot near the back of the lot, I saw Trevor's car parked 3 rows over. I considered leaving, but then I saw him walking out of the store, carrying a bag of something, probably tools he didn't know how to use. He spotted me before I could pull out. His face twisted into a scowl. He marched over and banged on my window with his fist. I rolled it down. Quote 117, he demanded. Quote 118, quote 119, quote 120. His face flushed red. Quote 21, quote 122, quote 123. I stared at him. Quote 124, quote 125, quote 126, quote 127. I almost laughed. Quote 128, quote 129, quote 130. His mouth snapped shut. Quote 131. I continued, my voice calm. Quote 32. Trevor's hands curled into fists. For a moment, I thought he might actually take a swing. But he didn't. He just stood there, trembling with rage. Quote 133, he said, finally. Quote 134-4. I rolled up my window and drove away. Back at my office, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. My job involved reviewing contracts for compliance, which meant I knew exactly how to structure a legal argument. I drafted a summary document outlining the conditional clause, my financial contributions, and the timeline of payments. I kept the language clean, factual, and undeniable. When I finished, I saved the file and leaned back in my chair. My coworker, Vincent, walked by and paused at my desk. Quote 135, he said. Quote, 36. Quote, 137. I smiled. Quote, 138. He shrugged and walked away. I turned back to my screen and opened the family group chat. Scrolled through the messages. Trevor had been busy, posting updates about the house sale like it was already a done deal. He'd even started tagging real estate agents in the comments. My phone buzzed. Another message. Aunt Linda. Trevor, are you really planning to sell the house? It's been in the family for 50 years. Trevor. Yeah, and it's mine now. I can do what I want with it. Aunt Linda. I just think you should talk to your grandparents first. Trevor. I already did. They're fine with it. I doubted that. But I didn't respond. Not yet. That evening, I met with Nora again. Same coffee shop, same corner table. She brought a stack of papers with her. Quote, 143. She said, sliding a document across the table. Quote, 144. Quote, 145. Quote, 146. Quote, 147. Quote, 148. I nodded. Quote, 149. Nora smiled faintly. Quote, 150 as. Quote, 151-1. She left with the paperwork. I stayed at the coffee shop for another hour, nursing a second cup of coffee and watching people walk by. My mind felt clear for the first time in weeks, maybe for the first time in years. The barista, a young woman with bright pink hair, approached my table. Quote, 152. She asked. Quote, 153. She glanced at the stack of papers in front of me. Quote, 154. Quote, 155. Quote, 156. Quote, 157. She walked away, and I gathered my papers, slipped them back into the folder, stood up, and left. The drive home was quiet. I thought about what was coming, about the moment when Trevor would realize he'd lost, about the look on Grandpa's face when the truth came out, about the silence that would fall over that dining room table. I wasn't doing this for revenge. At least, that's what I told myself. I was doing it because it was right, because I'd earned it, because I'd spent 20 years carrying a family that never even thanked me. But maybe there was a part of me, a small, angry part, that wanted to see them squirm. The next morning, I woke up to a message from Aunt Linda. Quote, 58. I called her. Quote, 59, she said, her voice soft. Quote, 60. Quote, 161. Quote, 62. Quote, 63. She sighed. Quote, 64. Quote, 65. Quote, 166. Quote, 167. There was a long pause. Quote, 168. Quote, 169. Quote, 170, she said quietly. Quote, 171. I hung up and checked the group chat. Trevor had posted again. Trevor. Quote, 172. My chest tightened. Another announcement. Another public spectacle. Perfect. I opened my folder and reviewed the documents one more time. Everything was in place. Every receipt, every record, every piece of evidence. I'd spent years building this case without even realizing it. Now it was time to present it. The days leading up to the second Thanksgiving passed slowly. I went to work, came home, reviewed my documents, made sure everything was perfect, rehearsed what I would say, how I would present it. I wanted to be calm, collected, undeniable. On Tuesday, Nora called. It's done, she said. The declaration was processed this morning. You're officially listed as the rightful inheritor. It's binding? Completely. The county has it on file. If anyone tries to contest it, they'll need to provide evidence that you didn't meet the conditions. And based on what you showed me, that's impossible. I exhaled slowly. Thank you. Good luck Thursday. I hung up and stared at my apartment ceiling. It was real. It was actually real. After 20 years, after $200,000, after countless hours and weekends and sacrifices, it was finally real. On Wednesday evening, I packed the folder into my car, made sure I had everything, the bank statements, the tax records, the emails from Grandpa, the title addendum, the county declaration, the photographs, the contractor invoices, everything. I barely slept that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, running through every possible scenario. How Trevor would react, how Grandpa would try to explain, how Grandma would cry, how the family would turn on me. But I was ready. Thursday morning arrived cold and gray. I got dressed slowly, deliberately, dark jeans, a plain button-down shirt, nothing flashy. I wasn't trying to make a statement with my appearance. The folder would do that for me. Before I left, I stopped by the county clerk's office one more time, not to file anything, just to verify. The woman at the desk confirmed what Nora had said. The declaration was official. The house was legally mine. I drove to my grandparents' house with the windows down, even though the November air was cold. I needed to feel something real, something grounding. The cold air bit at my face, sharp and clarifying. When I arrived, the driveway was already full of cars. Uncle Ray's truck, Aunt Linda's sedan, Trevor's flashy coupe parked obnoxiously close to the front door, taking up 2 spaces. I grabbed the folder and walked inside. The house smelled like roasted turkey and cinnamon. Grandma was in the kitchen, humming to herself. She looked up when I entered and gave me a distracted smile. "Ethan, you're here." "Good. Help me with the rolls, will you?" I set the folder on the counter and started arranging rolls in a basket. Grandma didn't ask about it. She didn't ask about me. She just kept humming, lost in her own world. Trevor was in the living room, holding court with Uncle Ray and a couple of cousins. He was talking about real estate markets, interest rates, things he'd clearly Googled the night before. When he saw me, his expression darkened, but he didn't say anything. Aunt Linda found me in the hallway. "You okay?" she asked quietly. "I will be." She studied my face. "What's in the folder?" "The truth." She nodded slowly. "Good. It's time." The dining room table was set the same way it had been at the first Thanksgiving. Same plates, same centerpiece, same arrangement. I sat in the same spot I'd occupied before, near the end, wedged between people who barely noticed I existed. Trevor sat at the opposite end, smirking at his phone. He looked up and caught my eye, his smirk widening. Grandpa stood at the head of the table and cleared his throat. The room went quiet. "Quote 185, he said, his voice steady. Quote 186. I felt everyone's eyes shift toward me. My face stayed neutral. "There was some confusion," Grandpa continued, "about the house, about who it's going to, and I want to make it clear, publicly, that the house will go to Trevor. That decision is final. We've thought about it carefully, and it's what's best for everyone." Trevor grinned. "Thanks, Grandpa. I won't let you down." Grandpa nodded. "I know you won't, son." I reached for my water glass, took a sip, set it down. Then I stood. The room went silent again. "Grandpa," I said, my voice calm, "can I show you something?" He frowned. "What?" I picked up the folder and walked around the table. Every pair of eyes followed me. I set the folder in front of Grandpa and opened it. "This," I said, "is a record of every payment I've made on this house over the last 20 years. Roof repairs, plumbing, property taxes, the furnace, the kitchen remodel, everything." Grandpa's face went pale. He stared at the documents but didn't touch them. $214,000, I continued. That's what I've spent keeping this house standing, not including my time, not including the weekends I gave up, not including the phone calls at midnight when something broke, just the money. Grandma gasped. "Ethan, what are you—" "And this," I said, pulling out another sheet, "is the title addendum from 1998, the one that says the house goes to whoever funded renovations and property taxes for more than 10 consecutive years." Trevor stood up. "That's not—" "It's public record," I said, cutting him off. "Anyone can verify it. The county has it on file. The document number is right here." Uncle Ray leaned forward. "Walter, is this true?" Grandpa's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Quote 205. I said, looking directly at Grandpa. Quote 206. Quote 207. Grandpa's voice cracked. "I didn't think you'd need it." "Need it?" I repeated. This isn't about need. This is about what's right. This is about honoring the agreement you made. Trevor slammed his hands on the table. This is insane. You can't just come in here and… I already filed the declaration, I said. 3 days ago. It was processed Tuesday morning. The house is legally mine. The room erupted. Trevor's face turned bright red. Quote, 215, I said. Quote, 216. I pointed to the document. Grandpa leaned forward, squinting at the numbers, his hands shaking. Grandma started crying. Quote, 217. Quote, 218. Grandpa's hands were shaking. I thought we were doing the right thing. The right thing, I said. The right thing would have been treating me like I mattered. The right thing would have been acknowledging what I've done for this family instead of giving everything to him. I pointed at Trevor. He's borrowed $30,000 from you and never paid back a cent. He maxed out Grandma's credit card. He's lied to you, manipulated you, and used you, and you still chose him. That's not fair, Grandma sobbed. No, I said. It's not. Trevor lunged toward me, but Uncle Ray grabbed his arm. Let him go, Uncle Ray said quietly. This is wrong, Trevor shouted. This is so wrong. You can't just steal my inheritance. I didn't steal anything, I said. I earned it. You're a vindictive, selfish. Careful, I said, my voice dropping. You might want to watch what you say, because I also have records of every loan you took from Grandpa, every promise you broke, every lie you told, and I'm willing to share those too. Trevor's mouth snapped shut. Quote, 34. I continued, pulling out another document. Quote, 2-35. I laid it on the table. The room was silent except for Grandma's crying. You want to know why I'm doing this? I said, my voice steady. Because I spent 20 years being invisible, 20 years being the reliable one, the boring one, the one who didn't need recognition. And you celebrated him. You praised him for doing nothing while I kept this house, your house, from falling apart. Aunt Linda spoke up. Ethan's right. I've watched this for years. We all have. Uncle Ray nodded slowly. Walter, I think you need to look at these documents. Grandpa picked up the papers with trembling hands. Read them. His face went from pale to gray. I didn't know, he whispered. I didn't know it was this much. You didn't want to know, I said. Trevor was shaking. This isn't over. I'll contest this. On what grounds? I said. That you deserve it more? Show me your receipts. Show me your contributions. Show me anything that proves you kept this house standing. He couldn't. We all knew he couldn't. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a key ring. The house keys. The ones Grandpa had given me years ago so I could come and go for repairs. I set them on the table in front of him. These are mine now, I said, legally, officially. Trevor's voice cracked. You can't do this. I already did. I picked up the folder and turned toward the door. Explain it now, Trevor.